Get the technology set.
Okay, I've got the technology set. Well, first of all, spoken quite a few places. I've spoken several places, universities in Africa, as well as throughout the United States and Canada. But, whenever I come back to Spartanburg to speak, I'm reminded of the great words of Judy Garland in The Wizard of Oz. Be ever so humble, there's no place like home. And it's great to see that this type of crowd, because usually when I speak up here, it's usually my family that comes, but to see all of you here really touches my heart, and I'm very moved, humble, and grateful to be here to speak for you today. So, with that being said, without further ado, let me begin. Oh, this thing dropped. I hope it still plays well. Now, for those of you who don't know, what I just played, the lyrics to that go, deep river, Lord, my home is over Jordan. Deep river, Lord, I've got to cross over into campground. Now, during the days of slavery, when slaves would sing things like that, the slave owner would go, gee, what a wonderful song about going down to the river and getting baptized. No. It was sung in code to say, we want to get off of this plantation by probably taking a boat or swimming or any way possible out of here. But they had to do things like that in code in order to get the message across to others who were within that culture and who knew what they were talking about. And that's an interesting form of black folklore because you see, so often, because they were forced to be illiterate, people have this assumption that because they were denied the right to learn to read and write, that necessarily made them ignorant. No, they have to develop a sort of folk cleverness to get around things like that, to get their messages across to people who are within that culture that, hey, we're going to try to get on out of here, okay? And so that's one of the things about the folklore of people of African descent throughout the world is that it was about using cleverness to get some messages across. So let me take you back, way back, to West Africa, where in areas where they did not have the written word, they had the spoken word. And the spoken word was given through what are known as the griots. And the griots were the people who passed down stories from generation to generation via the spoken word to illustrate things. And while I was there in Africa, I've been to 5 or 6 countries over there over the last 4 years. I managed to meet quite a few griots, and they told me some really interesting things. And I'm going to start with one of the really interesting ones, which was the story of the king of a country called Mali, known as Sundiata. And the story goes like this, that his father was this king by the name of Mabel. And he had several wives, like many kings did those days. And among those wives were several really beautiful women. But there was one that he had that was sort of a consolation prize after defeat. And the lady was so ugly that they called her the Buffalo Woman. And he had another problem. He had no male heirs to the throne. So one day while he's in his hut, he hears a, "Yes, who is it?" "Your Majesty, I have some tidings for you." "Oh, you do? What is it?" "Your Majesty, one of your wives is with child." "Really? You are going to have an heir?" "Oh my goodness, this is great. Is it Amina? Is it Aisha? Well, is it Khadijah?" "You mean the Buffalo Woman?" Lord have mercy, I knew I shouldn't have had all that wine that night. And so sure enough, the buffalo woman had a child. And when the night the child was born, yes, what is it? Your Majesty, your wife has just born you a son. Oh, really? Can I see it? Well, Your Majesty, before you do that, I have to warn you. Wait a minute, what is this foolishness? I can't see my child? Well, you see, Your Majesty, I think it's only fair that I warn you that, out of my way, peasant, I demand to see my child. So he goes into the hut where the child was born. All right, where is my child? And there was the most twist-faced, twisted-bodied child that you would ever see. And he said, this is going to be my son? Yes, Your Majesty. Because they wanted big, strong, robust, and healthy sons, you see. So, anyway, King Megan died. And there was a corrupt king by the name of Sumanguru who went around taking the kingdom, taking the wives, taking the grain, taking the gold and all of that. And then he went into King Megan's kingdom, and he said, well, I've already pillaged and stolen all of the food, the gold, and the women. Now I want to see this new king so I can cut his head off and take over the throne. Where is the king? And all of a sudden this weak, pitiful voice said, here, Your Majesty. Huh? And he saw this physically gnarled little king. Hey, you know what? I don't want you coming here and taking over my kingdom. I want you to get out of here now. You pitiful little thing, you are the king here? Your Majesty, should I cut his head off? Cut his head off? I wouldn't even waste my sword on this little shrimp here. We'll keep her around as the court jester to make us laugh. Hey, you stop that. I don't like it. Get out of my way. Hey, this kingdom is ours. We own this land now. Yeah, well, one day I'm going to go up and fix him. So the people suffered for years under his tyranny. And then, all of a sudden, these wise men came to the kingdom. Where is King Sundiata? Here I am. Oh, my goodness, we got to do something with this voice here. Come with us. We will take you for several years and prepare you to take your rightful place. So they took him, and then they built up his body, and they built up his physique, and they built up his voice and everything. And then, 10 years later, King Sumanguru was counting up his ill-gotten gain. 1 million, 2 million, 3 million. Yes, who is it? Your Majesty, you have a challenge for the throne of Mali. A challenge? Who's going to challenge me? You remember that little shrimp king from about 10 or so years ago? Oh. Yeah, I remember him. What about him? He wants to challenge you for the throne. He what? He said he wants to challenge you to the throne. All right. I tell you, we'll go out there, cut his head off, and come back for lunch and get back to doing some robbing and stealing, okay? All right, 1 million, 4 million, 5 million. So the day came in the battlefield of Karina. And so the evil king Sumanguru was going into the valley with only 3 of his men. All right, so where's this shrimp king so we can cut off his head and go back to robbing and stealing? And all of a sudden, a huge shadow came across him and said, Sumanguru, is that you? What? Who's that? And soon he saw this huge phalanx of black muscle, skin shining with his bald head, holding up a sword about 7.5 feet tall, surrounded by thousands of other Africans who were fed up with his rule. Sumanguru, prepare to meet your doom. Wait, hold on. I thought that little shrimp king was coming. Well, I am he. Years later, I am the one you once mocked. Prepare to meet thy doom. Ah! So much for Sumanguru. So King Sundiata ruled righteously for the next 35 years until his own passing, and helped make the kingdom of Mali in West Africa to be a great one. And another thing about the Sundiata person. You see, in the name Sundiata in English loosely translates to hungering lion. And so he was the hungering lion that served as a king. Sound familiar? Now you know where Walt Disney got that from. That's the foundation of the Lion King story, plus the story that many African mothers tell their children about how, even if they start out small and insignificant, they can one day too grow up to be great. The message in that story. And there are many others like that. I spent some time in Ghana. And in Ghana, the folk hero of Ghana is inspired by the name of Anansi. And Anansi was supposed to be this really wise person. And so his full name was Kwaku Anansi, which is he who was born on Wednesday. And while I was over there, the Akan people gave me the name Kwaku. And I guess because they knew that I like to tell stories and such. But in either case, though, one of the interesting stories about Anansi is this. That one day, he found out that there was this jar that was filled with all the wisdom in the world. And he was getting kind of greedy and said, yeah, I want that jar full of wisdom. And so, hey, I know what I'll do. So late one night, he took the jar of wisdom, and he took his tentacles and started crawling up the tree, figured he'd take the jar of wisdom, put it up in his net, and have it all for himself so he could rule all over the rest of the kingdom. But as he's holding a few of his tentacles, grabbing onto the jar, he's going up through the web. All of a sudden, the web slips, and the jar of wisdom crash. And soon, all the other animals in the kingdom ran around and started grabbing bits of the wisdom until there was none left. And so Anansi stood there and went, So this other old wise spider come by. What's the matter with you, Anansi? Well, I just had this jar that was filled with all the wisdom, and all the other animals done gone and taken and the jar is broken. The old spider looked at him. So? What do you mean so? I could have had all that wisdom myself. Just, listen to something, okay? Don't you know that it's better for many people to have wisdom instead of just one? See? People, as I told the students of the University of Gambia, people have this mistaken impression about Africans being backward and uncivilized and all of that. But you study a people long enough, you find that a lot of the peoples of this planet, who many people assume are backward because they may not have our conveniences and inventions and all of that, you find that they have this own folk wisdom of their own that in many cases with their behavior has more civilization in their pinky fingers than we do in our advanced society and our whole bodies, in many cases. So, another one along similar lines, in Senegal, is the story of the talking skull that goes like this. Said that there was a fellow who was walking down the street, and on this street, this rural jungle type area, and all of a sudden he looks around this bush and he sees a skull sitting there. He's like, look at the skull. Wonder what's this doing here? Yeah, how did this get here? And all of a sudden the skull goes, talk brought me here. What? The skull just talked. What happened? You heard me. Talk brought me here. Oh my goodness, this is wild. Let me go to the king. So he went over to the king and said, yes, what is it? Your Majesty, you're not going to believe this, but there's a talking skull out there. Oh, what? A talking skull? I just saw a skull talk. Listen, I've got many things to do in running this kingdom. I do not have time with foolishness. I'm going to go out and look at this. But if you are wasting time with your foolishness, you will be dealt with. So he went back with the king over there and he says, now see, Your Majesty, here's the talking skull right there. Okay. Now, say a few syllables for His Majesty. Yeah, go ahead, mutter a few things, the alphabet, you know, a little bit of the Quran or something like that, you know, say something to His Majesty. Introduce yourself. Come on, Skull. Talk. Say something. Say something. Well, can't stay. I'm waiting. Well, see, come on. Say something for His Majesty. Say a few syllables. Come on, recite something. You know, oh boy. Young man, you have wasted my time with foolishness. I will not have this. I'm a busy king. Off with his head. So, a couple of days later, another guy's walking down the village. And he sees two skulls down there. There's 2 skulls. I wonder what's going on here. And he says, this one looks pretty fresh here. Now I wonder how this skull got here. And the newly fresh skull, the most recent one, said, talk is what brought me here. Slick, huh? Now, anybody here a Wofford graduate? Anybody here graduated from Wofford College? Okay, well, about several years ago, there was a professor from Senegal, West Africa, named Dr. Ousmane Sène. And he taught here for a while, and he went back to Africa, and where he's now at the West African Cultural Center in Dakar, the capital of Senegal, as well as the Cheikh Anta Diop University of Dakar. And he's also one of the griots who I was telling you about, who passed the stories down from generation to generation. And he told me this really interesting one in particular about how among the Wolof people, which is the main tribe in Senegal, more about them later, that they are known for their storytelling. And one of the things that they do is they often tell the children about good behavior by telling them the stories about a rabbit named Blesher. Well, the rabbit's name wasn't Blesher, but you get the idea. Anyway, about a rabbit by the name of Lok and a hyena by the name of Boki. And the essence of that is that the rabbit was weak but wise, and Boki was strong, but he was stupid. And so he explained that they often told the children the stories so the children could be wise, just like Boki, but not be stupid, but to be wise like Lok, but not big and stupid like Boki. In other words, his brain will always outdo his physical strength. And so it turns out that about a year or so after I spoke with him and took this down, I came across the following interesting story. That around Port Royal, South Carolina, there was a man named Nathaniel Hayward in 1874 who had a guest from the north by the name of Miss Abby Holmes Christensen. And they're sitting on the porch of the plantation, and so Nathaniel Hayward goes, Miss Christensen, you want some entertainment? She said, sure. And so he said, so he goes out into the field, looks out in the field, and he sees this old black man who used to be enslaved by him, still working in the field. Hey, Prince. Yes, sir? Come on up here for a minute. Yes, sir. So Prince Baskin gets up there on the porch, says, Yes, sir, Mr. Hayward, what can I do for you? He said, well, tell that story that you told me the other day. Oh, you mean, okay, sure. He said, well, see, there was this rabbit, right, who was out stealing the food from the wolf. And so the wolf tried to catch him one day, and he told his wife, look here, honey, I'm going to have some rabbit stew tonight. And so to trap the rabbit, he built a lump of tar, see, and he put a hat on the lump of tar and put a carrot for his nose and buttons on his eyes and an old coat on him. Said it was the tar baby, right? So the rabbit came by to steal the food one night, and he looked at this tar baby and he says, how you doing there, stranger? Put his hand on the tar baby. Got stuck in the tar. The old wolf put a kerchief around his neck, got a knife and fork. All right, I got you now, Brother Rabbit. He says, wait a minute. Before you go ahead and have a feast with me, I got to ask you one favor. Yeah, what's that? You can cut my head off and skin me alive, but whatever you do, don't throw me in that briar patch. Throw you in the briar patch? That's right. You can cut off my tail and stuff me as a mannequin, but whatever you do, please don't throw me in that briar patch. Don't throw you in the briar patch, huh? Well, I'll fix you. 1 for money, 2 for the show, 3 to get ready, and Mr. Wolf, you done forgot something. What's that? I'm a free man now, and you ain't getting no rabbit soup tonight. Hey! Oh, my goodness. So Abby Holmes Christensen listened to this and said, Prince, that's a really fascinating story. Where'd you get that tale from? And Prince Baskin answered, from my African granddaddy. And when I went back to Africa and saw Dr. Usman Seni, I said, so basically what you were telling me about Luke and Boki, so that sounds kind of very familiar in America. And he said, where do you think you get your Brer Rabbit from? Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. And that goes to show the connection to these things. And here's another connection that some of you, if you've been in this state forever, might slightly be familiar with. Anybody recognize that? Very good. Michael rowed the boat ashore. What you probably didn't know is that that song has its origins in 1867, when musicologists came down to Port Royal to write a book called Slave Songs of the United States. And a man named Charles Ware, heard local black people singing that and transcribed it into written lyrics and musical notation and put it in the book Slave Songs of the United States. So in 1955, there was a lady in Charleston named by the name of Miss Septima Poinsett Clark, who was a well-known civil rights leader. I saw her twice when I was a boy. And she was fired from teaching from Sanders Clyde Elementary in Charleston because of her civil rights activities. So she went to Mont Eagle, Tennessee to teach illiterate black adults how to read and write and register to vote and take charge of their lives. In 1959, she was joined by some white kids from the University of Berkeley in California and the coffee houses of Greenwich Village in New York, and they were all arrested. So Miss Clark was put in a separate cell from the white kids for obvious reasons, and while she was alone in her cell, she began to sing Michael rowed the boat ashore, and the white kids had never heard anything like this before. So when they were all finally released, the white kids went back to the coffee houses of Greenwich Village and the University of Berkeley, and they took songs like that with them. And this is where you get that generation of the white folk singers, like Pete Seeger and Peter, Paul, and Mary, and the Smothers Brothers, and the Kingston Trio, and the Mamas and the Papas, and Joni Mitchell, and Joan Baez, and Bob Dylan. If you can imagine Bob Dylan getting up there and going, Michael rowed the boat ashore, hallelujah. This is how the song gained international fame. So in 1981, Ms. Clark sued the state of South Carolina for the unjust lost years of Back Bay and won and collected before she died on December the 15th, 1987 at the age of 89. So that song, along with the sweetgrass baskets and the foodways and folkways and dialect of much of the black community around Charleston and Georgetown and Brunswick, Georgia, and Savannah, these things are collectively known as the Gullah culture of this region. And it gets its name from the Goyla tribe of Sierra Leone, which I could tell you firsthand from visiting there, has a long history of growing and cultivating rice, and thus they were brought here in slavery to cultivate the rice along the Sea Island plantations down by Charleston, Georgetown, Brunswick, and Savannah. And because those islands were so isolated, the only white people there were the plantation owners and the overseers. Thus, these black people kept more of their African speech and folk ways than any other black people brought to these United States. Now, for those of you who don't know, I was born here but I was put up for adoption as an infant, and I was raised in Mount Pleasant, right outside of Charleston. And I was reunited with my family here back in 2000, and I've been back and forth ever since, contributing to some of your historical materials. And so, by the way, if you go to the Southside Monument, I'm on that monument too, by the way, I should add that. But anyway, the family who raised me, my grandmother, Janie Fordham, was born in Owendaw, South Carolina around 1900. And because she had to work in the fields as a girl, she didn't have the opportunity to go to school and learn to read and write. So she spoke Gullah till the day she died. So in 1968, when I was 4 years old, she would call me in the house by going, "Damon, y'all churn too trifling, y'all better come on in, y'all like box y'all," and things like that. So she and my grandfather saved their money so that my dad could go to South Carolina State in Orangeburg, and Dad was the first of 3 generations of teachers in our family. I'm the second, and my nephew, who's now teaching in Greenville, is the third. So in those days, if you were in an educated black family, your parents did not want you speaking Gullah. But as you could always tell, I always had a little bit of the ham in me. So every now and then I would deliberately make Dad furious and go, "Daddy, I'm hungry, I just want something for eat. Stop it! I didn't send you to school to talk like that. I went wrong, Daddy, I just want some okra soup. Stop that! Quit my grandmother, stop it, I say." So in 1932, there was Dr. Lorenzo Dow Turner, a black professor of linguistics at Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee. And he was teaching at South Carolina State when he heard some students from Johns Island, South Carolina say, "Man, Dr. Turner, you fought up in ya, man, up the window." Excuse me? Man, Dr. Turner, hot up in ya, up the window? Why, what type of speech is this? I find this fascinating. This I must study. So he went throughout coastal South Carolina and Georgia studying Gullah, and in 1949 he wrote Africanisms in the Gullah dialect. And in 1988, General Joseph Momo of Sierra Leone, West Africa, spoke at the Penn Center, 70 miles south of here in St. Helens Island, and he got up in front of the people and said in his native tongue, "I'm glad to pass you today. I'm glad to see you today." And a lady in the audience who spoke Gullah replied, "Pray God, that man for talk like we. He sounds like us." So the man who was bloody Fasim took the people who thought like we back to Sierra Leone, and the people on both sides were amazed at the similarities of languages, lifestyles, and culture, that PBS went along with them and filmed a documentary that was fittingly entitled Family Across the Sea, and that's the story of Gullah.
Cool.
Thank you. So now I'm going to take all of this even closer to home. Now, some of you might recognize that as Precious Lord, Take My Hand, right? Now, here's what you probably didn't know. That song was written by the great gospel writer Thomas Dorsey, right? But did you know that in 1937, a group of Spartan men, Arthur Lee Beatty, Roosevelt Benoit, Jimmy Bryant, Henderson Massey, and William Bogle, they were the Heavenly Gospel Singers of Spartanburg, South Carolina. And they made the very first recording of the song, Precious Lord. Did you know that?
No.
That's right. And this is where I get into the various stories of Spartanburg that most people don't know. Now, I was born at a place that some of you might be familiar with. Anybody here heard of the Bull Clinic on 371 South Liberty Street? Any of y'all heard of that? For those of you who don't know, that was the black hospital in Spartanburg during the segregation days. I was born there in 1964. And it was run by a man named Dr. John C. Bull. Okay? He ran it from about 1939 until he died, I believe, around 1990. He died in 1990. And the person who helped me get back with my biological family up here was a teacher at Carver High School by the name of Mr. Joseph Kimpson, who passed about a couple of years ago. Did you know him? Okay. Anyway, Mr. Kimpson would tell me a whole lot of stories about Spartanburg. And one was one that I'm glad the kids are here for this, that I thought was pretty interesting, was that Dr. Bull was known for his generosity to the black community of Spartanburg, because in those days they didn't have a whole lot of resources. So he was always lending out money to people who were in dire need. So he said that he would sit down in front of his office over at 371 South Liberty Street, not too far from here, and he would be there in his white coat and his ever-present cigarette, and he would go to sleep. But something would happen while he was sleeping. That when he would go to sleep and he would wake up in the middle after the afternoon in front of his office, his coat would be stuffed with money, dollar bills. Why? Because the people who he lent money to, they had a certain code of honor within the community, that they would just go back to him and pay him back. And, because they had this level of trust, they would stuff the money in his pocket, and other people who owed him would come and not take any of the money that didn't belong to him out of his pockets. So he would wake up from his snap, sometimes with interest, with all this money in his pocket, as a fairly wealthy man, because he was so kind and generous to the people around this area. And the moral of the story, especially to you young kids out there, is, you know what? If you, in the words of the great singer Sam Cooke, when you spread good all around, you'll be able to sleep when the sun goes down. In other words, if you go through life doing good, trust me, it'll come back to you sooner or later. And another one involves another doctor from around here. Now, none of you would remember this guy because he died in 1956. His name was Dr. John Wesley Sexton. And he actually had an African-American pharmacy up here in Spartanburg. I believe it was here on St. John Street, if I recall. But an interesting story about him was this. He was a country boy, a little farm boy out here in Spartanburg, back in the late 1800s. And he had this eye on this young lady who aspired for better things in life. Well, it turned out that one day he was out in the field, getting his farm ready, digging with his hoe and so forth, when all of a sudden, the girl that he loved was in a buggy driving by with this very sophisticated fellow. This fella had a top hat, had on tails, and a nice cutaway coat and everything, driving a nice clean carriage and so forth. And, he looked at him and he got jealous. And so he went up to her and says, "Well, hey, honey, how is you doing?" And so they looked at him, and the fellow who had the nice cutaway coat, you see, he was a graduate of Morehouse College down in Atlanta, Georgia. And he was also a graduate of Meharry Medical School over in Nashville, Tennessee. So as you can imagine, he tended to, as the old folks say, put on airs. He thought rather highly of himself. So when he saw this little country boy come out there, with his overalls and everything, go, "Hey there, how is y'all doing?" What do you think he did? He laughed. And they laughed, and she goes, "Who's this country boy having the nerve to talk to you?" He says, "Oh, he just some old fella out there in the field." "Man, country boy, go on back to your field until you learn how to talk some, okay?" And so they left him. But now, young people, I have to ask you this. If somebody made fun of you like that, how would you feel? How would you feel if somebody was out there making fun of you like that? Huh? How would you feel? Would you like that?
No.
Of course you wouldn't. But what would you do if somebody made fun of you like that? What would you do? Don't be shy, you're among friends here. You don't know? Well, okay, I'm going to give you an answer. Many people would let that discourage them for life. But when he saw that fellow with his top hat and his cutaway coat and his fancy thing and everything, he says, you know what? I'm going to show him. So guess what? Not only did he go to Morehouse, he also went to Maid Harry Medical School, became one of the first African-American doctors right here in Spartanburg, married a totally different woman, had a nice set of kids, left behind a lot of really interesting letters to read, was featured in what they call the Negro Yearbook of 1919 and all of that, which is where I read that story, and I'm telling it to you today so to let you know that the people who make fun of you today, don't let yourself get angry and discouraged. Take that as a challenge to make yourself somebody that the people who are laughed at today will be respected tomorrow. So keep that in mind, okay? All right. So let's move on to some others here. There was a fellow named Lewis Evans who was interviewed by the Spartanburg Herald back in 1933. And he grew up in slavery. And so the Spartanburg Herald was doing this series of the stories of people who grew up as slaves and so forth. And they interviewed him. And he said a very interesting story. Said that he was working in the big house with his owners here in Spartanburg. When he heard, so there was an elderly black maid who was there who was owned by the owner and so forth. She's cleaning up the house, and the lady of the house was sitting there, fanning herself, and the slave owner came in with the newspaper, right? I think it was the Carolina Journal at that time. And he said, "Did you hear the news? What's that?" And so the lady goes, so the gentleman goes, "I see that Lincoln fella is now the new president." She says, "Oh, really?" And so the elderly black enslaved woman goes, "Why, that no good piece of trash, he ain't gonna do nothing but ruin the country." So young Lewis was there shining some furniture, and he heard her say this. And he's like, "Why would she say that?" So later that day, the lady cleaned up the house, and they went back to the slave quarters, and she went back all around all the other enslaved people and all that with Lewis in tow and said, "Hey, y'all hear the news? What's that? That fellow Lincoln we were talking about? Yep, he got elected." And they all went, "Yeah! Hallelujah!" They started dancing around each other and just clapping and applauding and everything. And Lewis was like, "Wait, she said one thing in the big house, but when she's out here in the quarters, she's saying another thing." Now, remember what I told you earlier about that song, Deep River, and how they had to conceal what that meant during those days? Because had this old lady cheered Lincoln being president in front of the owners, she could have been beaten. But these people, again, they may not have been literate, but they weren't dumb. So when they went back to the quarters and told what happened and told what Lincoln represented, it was hallelujah time for them. And this made a very interesting impression upon Lewis Evans that he told this to the Spartanburg Herald in 1933, many, many years later. Now, what's the point of that? The point of that is this. When you sit down with old people, write down their stories, because you can get some really interesting stuff that way. And one of these older people who I spoke with was a fellow by the name of Reverend Booker T. Sayers, who used to preach at Cornerstone Baptist Church up here. He told me some real good ones. He said that when he was a boy, he was going to Highland Elementary School here in Spartanburg. And right over by where, what's that restaurant on John White Boulevard, the John White Stone, what's that restaurant? Huh? Yeah, the Beacon, thank you. See, I've been away from here for a while, you got to excuse me. Highland Elementary School, over not too far from where the Beacon is today, said that this lady superintendent came to their school around 1949. And the school all got, had everything ready. They did all these displays and paintings and all that to see. But this superintendent lady, she was of the old school, that really didn't believe a whole lot in education for African Americans. So she came in there and she saw all the paintings and all of that and the essays the children wrote, and called the principal of the school up there in front of everybody and said, I see you got some nice stuff here. He said, "Can these children sing?" And the principal goes, yes, ma'am, they can sing. She goes, well, tell them to give me a good rendition of Dixie. Well, this is 1949. The principal had no choice. But Reverend Sears told me that he refused to sing. And so the principal spanked him, right? So when he went home with a note, now back in the days, folks, when you got spanked by the principal or your teacher and you went home with a note, what would happen when you got home? Exactly. So he gave the note to Booker T. Sayers Sr., who was also a reverend, and said, oh, you've been sassing the teacher, huh? Well, I'm gonna, and so the mother said, don't do that. She said, boy, why didn't you sing Dixie? She goes, Mom, I saw what it was in the cotton and all that. What would I look like singing about good times there in the land of cotton? I'm not singing that, Mom. So he said, his father said, you hear how sassy this boy is? I said, no. This boy has something that'll do him well in life, and it's called integrity. And so instead of discouraging that, we must encourage that. And so he avoided a second spanking. So, two more for you. One is that I told you I would spend time in Senegal, West Africa. And about how Dr. Ousmane Sene, there was this tribe of people called the Wolofs, who were known for their storytelling abilities and such. Well, everywhere I went in Senegal, people would look at me and point, Wolof, Wolof, Wolof. I'm like, what is that? And so when I came back here, my first cousin is a young lady by the name of Alasia Gibson. She's a social worker. And in fact, she was here the last time you saw me up here. She was my guest at that event. So I hadn't seen them in a while, and I'm telling them about my adventures in Africa. And I told how everyone swore that I was a Wolof, right? And she said, brace yourself for this. And I went over to her and she showed me the family's 23andMe DNA. And it turns out that we're descended from the Iwi people of Ghana and sure enough, the Wolof of Senegal. And so when I called the people, and I went back to Africa and I told them this, they were like, what did you need for that DNA for? We told you that when you were here. And when I looked up about the Wolof people of Senegal, it said, get this, the Wolof people are known for their ability, their storytelling abilities, and for preserving the history.
There we go.
Yeah.
How about that? So I come by this naturally. And now for the grand finale of this story, of this film, is this. For those of you who don't know, the lyrics to that go, oh freedom over me, and before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. And that leads us to the grand finale of the story, which is the story of the Denmark-Vesey slave rebellion of Charleston in 1822. Denmark-Vesey was born in St. Thomas, Virgin Islands, around 1767. And he was owned by a Charlestonian named Captain Joseph Vesey. And Captain Vesey needed somebody to do the paperwork for the plantation, so he taught Denmark how to read and lived to regret it, because Denmark read other things. He read Exodus 21:16, which said, ye that stealeth a man and selleth him shall be put to death. And Revelation 13:10, which said, he that leadeth into captivity shall be led into captivity. Things you don't usually hear in church. And he also read about the Haitian Revolution, where the blacks of Haiti under Toussaint Louverture and Jean-Jacques Dessalines overthrew the rule of Napoleon to make Haiti the first free black republic in the Western Hemisphere. Things you don't usually hear about in the classroom. So with all this, you can guess what was on his mind. They came to Charleston in 1782, and Captain Vesey would rent Denmark out to do chores for other slave owners. And so therefore he would split the commission that he made from that with Denmark. So Denmark's walking down East Bay Street, September 30th, 1799, with money in his pocket, when he came across a barker who had a roulette wheel and a crowd surrounding him. And the barker said, "Hurry, hurry, hurry, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, step right on, place your bets on the number, step right up, round and around she goes, where she stops, nobody knows." Denmark placed a bet on number 1884 and won $1,500. So he went back to Captain VC. Let's see now, I'm working here in my ledger here. And, oh, Denmark, come on in, old boy, what can I do for you? Captain VC, I have a question for you. Why, certainly, what is it? Sir, how much am I worth? How much are you worth? Well, let me look in my ledger. Let's see how much. Oh, there it is. According to this, you're worth $600. Why do you ask? Plickety, 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 plickety. Okay, I'm worth 600. Here's 8. See ya. Hey, wait a minute, Denmark. Have a nice day. So Captain Beasy took Denmark to the courthouse, which ruled on December 31st, 1799, that Denmark Beasy was thenceforward and forever free. So Denmark became a lay minister at the Hempstead AME Church on Charleston's east side, and he was secretly gathering his congregation to form the Great Slave Rebellion of 1822. But then he warned his followers, "Do not tell those who get old coats from the slave master. Do not tell the favored few." May 25th, 1822. One of Denmark's followers, William Paul's, going down the corner of Broad East Bay in Charleston, and he ran into one of the favored few. His name was Peter Prelo. He was owned by Captain John Prelo. "Hey, Peter, what's going on?" "Oh, how you doing, Mr. Prelo?" "I'm all right." "Hey, Peter, come here, bro. Let me holler at you for a second." "Yeah, what is it?" "Look at Peter. You want to get down with what Denmark Beasy is trying to do?" "Denmark Beasy? Who that?" I'm so loud. "Here's our plan, Peter. We're going. Oh, wait a minute now. You gonna do all of that?" "Peter, wait. My feet don't fail me now. Hey, Peter, wait." Peter ran back to his owner, Captain John Prelo. "Mr. Prelo, Mr. Prelo, Mr. Prelo." "Oh, my goodness. Peter, what do you mean by waking me up at this ungodly hour of the evening? Do you realize what time it is? And what's the matter? You're shaking like a leaf on a tree." "Mr. Prelo, guess what Mr. Denmark Beasy's going to do? Guess what he's going to do?" "He is? Oh, my goodness. Heavens to Murgatroyd. This is outrageous, atrocious." It's pretty bad, too. "I must call out the militia expeditiously and right now." So he called out the militia, and Beasy and 34 of his followers were captured on June 16, 1822. And the court ruled that on July 2nd, 1822, Denmark Beasy and his followers were hanged by the neck until dead. Peter was fat and happy. The state of South Carolina freed Peter, gave him a financial stipend for the rest of his life. He never had to work another day in his life again. But elsewhere in Charleston was a free and educated black man named Bishop Daniel Alexander Payne, who had a school for free and enslaved children. And because Denmark Beasy used the Bible, history books, and the Constitution to encourage revolution, the state of South Carolina made it illegal to teach an African American to read and write, so they shut down his school. But he didn't let that stop him. He went to Xenia, Ohio, where he started Wilberforce College, the first black college in America that was run by black people. And one of his graduates was Bishop Richard Harvey King, who came to Charleston in 1865 and took what was left of the Hempstead AME Church and built a new church on 110 Calhoun Street that he named after the Hebrew word for God is with us, and said it would be the mother of the new black churches in Charleston, and that's how Mother Emanuel AME Church came into being. 1902, the great poet Paul Lawrence Dunbar spoke at Mother Emanuel. 1909, the great educator Booker T. Washington spoke at Mother Emanuel, and in Spartanburg that same year, by the way. In 1921, that great black educator Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois spoke at Mother Emanuel. And April 12, 1962, when other black churches in Charleston, including my own, locked them out for fear of reprisals, Martin Luther King spoke at Mother Emanuel. But unfortunately, that church is best known today for the fact that on June the 17th, 2015, the terrorist Dylan Roof entered Mother Emanuel and assassinated a couple of good friends of mine, the Reverend Clemente Pinckney and the librarian Cynthia Hurd, and 7 other members of the congregation. Dylan Roof was tried at the Julius Wade Teeswaring Judicial Center, and today he is at the Federal Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, awaiting his execution. So not too long after this, 10,000 of us marched on Mother Emanuel to show the world we were not afraid to go back into the church. And while we were out there marching, clapping our hands and singing our songs, the Jewish community of Charleston marched in front of the church and formed a circle and recited the Hebrew prayer of the dead to show solidarity with us. So 3 years later, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, when the Tree of Life Synagogue met the same fate as Mother Emanuel, a bunch of us went to the synagogue on Hazel Street for Friday night Shabbat services to return the favor of fellowship and solidarity. And this was also around the time that President Obama came down there, and he made history on that occasion. For that is when he was given the eulogy for Reverend Pinckney and went off script and gave his rendition of My name is Damon Fordham, and I hope you enjoy the